Mr. Crow 999 here, and welcome back to the Nest. In today's video, I'm going to talk about some legacy-related stuff in the Final Fantasy series. With FF16 coming out soon, there's been a lot of talk about what makes a Final Fantasy, or can make a Final Fantasy. This will be done like a top 10, but doesn't necessarily contain 10 different topics. These are things I think about when I think about a Final Fantasy and why 16 is one to me. Obviously, not everything here will be contained within 16, but there are things that people have considered, but these are things that people have considered to be part of the series. Number 1. Innovation. To me, this is the number one thing I think about when it comes to Final Fantasy games. It's also why I can easily see FF16 being a Final Fantasy. While there are some systems that are in many of the games, there are very few that are in every game. Because the series consistently changes things up and is willing to try different things in each game, it's always trying to keep things fresh. Even the spaces where I think maybe it has missed the mark in some capacity, it is still trying to strive for some level of innovation with what it is doing. A place I feel like where this is the case is FF13. It may be divisive, and while I don't find it being a tale worth expanding to 3 games, each game does have changes to its battle system while still having a baseline to its original system. It's trying to create a world with a specific lore, but it doesn't rest on the laurels of the original game to stay the same throughout all 3 games. The series as a whole tries to do some different things, and what will follow in this list is examples of where they tried something new and had success only to change it up afterwards. Number 2. Legacy creatures. I'll keep this narrowed down somewhat, but there are a few creatures in Final Fantasy that I think of when it comes to Final Fantasy. In particular, I'll be focusing in on Moogles, Chocobos, and Tonberries. But there are other examples that will follow these 3. Chocobos were introduced in FF2. These giant yellow horse chickens have become a beloved symbol in the series. Even in the SNES era of gaming, their designs didn't remain consistent. Delete the 3D really altered the designs, and even features like colored chocobos don't appear in every game. Some games they only appear as being a big bird yellow, but in other games they have colors. Where they do have colors, they tend to have altered travel abilities. This isn't something that's stuck around either, though. Color is more an aesthetic appeal, but we do know with FF16 there are at least 2 colors of chocobos. Whether there are different abilities remains to be seen, but at the very least a different color palette is nice. Later games do have color as a more customizable feature instead of abilities, but that's sort of the point. The chocobo as an idea is consistent, but aspects of it don't remain the same. Moogles and Tonberries are much the same. Moogles almost always try to have a cute look to them, though the designs do change a bit. Look at the original one versus, say, FF12. They're known for having a pom-pom on their head that is usually red, but has been known to change color. Tonberries probably have the most consistent design, even through all the graphical transitions. They have a move called Everyone's Grudge, they have a knife that they stab with, are robed and are green and small with a tail and a lantern. In the end, these legacy creatures are staples of the franchise, but they have undergone innovation themselves. Number 3. Limit breaks. These powerful attacks for players to use were introduced in FF6 as Desperation Acts. There were necessary circumstances for it to randomly activate, but each character had their own attack. This developed in FF7 to being most characters having 7 limits total spread across 4 levels, though there were exceptions to this in Cat She and Vincent. FF8 had limits that when you had Aura or lower HP, you could use them every turn. Trance was a modified multi-turn limit break that varied its effect based on the character in Trance. FF10 called them overdrives, and you could modify how you gained overdrive gauge to suit how you were using your characters or the situation you were entering. FF12 called them misquickenings, and you could activate them as long as you had the MP that filled the gauge up. These are just examples the series has had, but while the base idea of having a powerful desperate-like attack has remained the same, the execution of it has been varied and has continued to try and innovate the needs of it based on the battle system in place. Number 4. Turn-based combat. Not every battle system in Final Fantasy had a gauge that slowly or quickly filled up. At first it was select all your attacks for your team, then everyone on both sides of the battle would take a turn. The ATB was consistent through the SNES and PS1 era. With FF10 it changed the conditional time battle, where status effects like minor and major delay or quick attack could alter the order of turns like traditional spells haste and slow might. It became entirely possible to have an enemy take no turn even in a relatively extended battle. FF12 had the return of ATB, sort of. FF12 was more about setting up gambits for your characters to do the actions you wanted them to. Regular attacks varied in speed based on whether a character had skill with a weapon and what the weapon itself was. Each attack could combo as well, but it wasn't something that could manually be controlled. You could set up gear to allow for the higher chance of a combo and use the health mechanics attached to combo rate to have a larger combo. Even though these are all somewhat turn-based, it has been modified quite a bit. Essentially every battle system since FF10 has had some form of innovation attached to it. FF14 is more about cooldown management and doing positionals and mechanics correctly than it is about taking turns. Having a fully action-based combat system isn't an affront to the series that some think it is. It's in line with how the series has developed over 35 years. Just because something is different doesn't make it bad. Number 5. Traveling with vehicles. One could certainly say a chocobo could be a vehicle of sorts. At the very least, it's a way of traversal. But for the most part, there have been multiple modes of travel in Final Fantasy games, at least until FF10 anyway. The airship or airships, like FF4, where there's multiple of them, were consistently part of the mid to late game travel. Things like boats, submarines, propeller planes, chocobos, canoes are for the most part what has been seen in Final Fantasy games. Since FF10, however, there has been a distinct change, and this is more to how the world itself is realized. Games like FF10, 12, and 14 certainly have airships, but they also have area fast travel systems that allow you to teleport. They sort of remove a need for the vehicle outside of story function, or it's still vital for reaching a location for the first time. The thing is that there is no controlling the vehicle, so it almost doesn't matter that it's a thing. For the most part, our ways of travel since FF10 have been on foot, chocobo, and fast travel. 15 added a car you could drive around its open world, but it also had chocobos and fast travel in the car. Overall, the most consistent forms of travel in the series is walking and the chocobo. Seeing this is likely the case for most of FF16, it is quite fitting and consistent. Number 6. Characters with a noticeable and recognizable weapon. Many of the main characters, particularly in the post-SNES era, have a noticeable weapon that they are related to. That said, there are also weapons that are series staples. Things like Ultima Weapon, Excalibur, Masamune, Ragnarok are staples that are strong and in most games. While the design on some of these radically changes, some are relatively consistent. Ultima Weapon, for example, is blue and can be seen through. It's somewhat translucent. It also changes color as you lose health and is something that does happen in multiple games. I'm expecting Clive to have a similar type of sword that makes him memorable in picture. By this, I mean Cloud and the Buster Sword, Squall and his Gunblade and the version of it Lionheart, Titus and Brotherhood or Caladbolg. There are other examples in the series, but I do think Clive will end up with something like this, though his may simply be Ifrit. Number 7. Summoned Monsters. These magical creatures have taken different names from Icon, to Summon, to Eidolon, to Aeon, to Esper. There are a number of them that have been around for about as long as summons have been around. Series staples like Ifrit and Shiva are well known and have undertaken many different designs. Bahamut is another staple that has appeared as a summon, an enemy, a key lore character, a sky fortress, and a king. Characters like this are expected in any new Final Fantasy, and their designs are a big thing for fans to get hyped around. FF16 may be the most forward the summons have ever been put forward, except for maybe FF14 and its approach to primals. It's part of its story. Number 8. Fantastical Story. Each Final Fantasy has its own world that for the most part gets more and more fantastical in nature as it goes. Sometimes the story starts a bit slow or simple, but by the end you're either exploring a different world or realm, something that didn't seem possible at the beginning in any way, or something that leaves you scratching your head in a bit of wonder as to how the story got to the point where it is. They've tended to start in one place and while keeping the themes of the game intact, have ended up somewhere else entirely. Going from blowing up reactors to save the planet, to stopping a magical meteor and a madman to save the planet in FF7. Or to defeating a giant summoned sea monster by beating the thing inside of the sea monster in FF10. Some plot points have stayed consistent, but the execution and how we got from point A to point B has been at times nuts. These are 8 of the areas that I consider when asking, is this a Final Fantasy? What are some of yours? Leave them in the comments along with a like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Have a good day!